Hi everyone, thanks so much for listening to another episode of Dogman Encounters Radio. I'm Vic Cundiff and I'll be your host for the show. Before we bring on tonight's guest, if you've had a Dogman encounter and would like to speak with me about it, whether in private or on the show, please go to dogmanencounters.com and submit a report. I'd love to hear from you. If you've had a Sasquatch sighting and would like to be a guest on Bigfoot Eyewitness Radio, please go to bigfooteyewitness.com and submit a report. All right, let's bring on tonight's guest. Tonight's guest wishes to keep her identity anonymous. With that in mind, I'm just going to call her Doc. Doc, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, thank you for coming on. We appreciate your time. Doc, please give us a brief bio on yourself.
I am in my late 30s. I'm from a small town in eastern Colorado called Bennett. Our towns are spaced miles apart, just like our houses are. We have a lot of small town love and therefore a lot of small town feud as well. But I grew up 12 miles south of civilization, and my closest neighbor was 3.5 acres away. So I had plenty of ground to play on, and I had horses and dogs, and I was one of those kids that, unfortunately, my family was into drugs. So I spent a lot of time outside with my horses. No matter what time of day or night it was, I was always outside. There were times where I'd just get on my horse and leave. And I'd be gone for days on end, and my parents wouldn't bother to come looking for me because they knew I was okay and I was just on my horse. And I left the situation at that. I'm an avid animal lover. I'm an avid outdoors person. I would rather spend my time outside in nature than I would in a building of any kind. I just love being outside. And consequently, my love for the outdoors, I've had some rather interesting, scary experiences. I have one teenage son, and I also have an adopted son. And they've also had encounters out here as well.
So you're a horse lover. I knew you're all right. Believe it or not, I used to work on a horse ranch back in the 80s, so yeah, I love horses too.
Yeah, I love horses. I love animals. In fact, 3 of my dogs that I have out of the 4 are rescues. And when I lived up north, I was the person that people called about stray dogs that they found on the side of the road that people would dump, and I would go trap them and bring them home and wait for animal control to come get them. And if the Humane Society was full, I would house the dog and do some rehabilitation on him and then adopt him out myself.
Well, that's awfully nice of you to take them in like that. You used to think Sasquatch sightings were a joke. Now that you've had a bona fide Dogman encounter, what are your thoughts on the existence of Sasquatch?
You know, I never believed in cryptids at all up until I had my encounter. And now that I had my encounter, I've seen some things camping, and I'm a firm believer in Sasquatch, Bigfoot, Dogman. They're out there, and they do exist.
Yes, they do. You describe yourself as being a factual person and take a lot of pride in sticking to the facts. Because of that, do you take it more personally than most people would when your efforts to talk about your encounters are rebuffed by people?
I do, because I know my eyes aren't going to lie to me, and seeing is believing. And, you know, when I tell my encounter to somebody and they think that I'm full of it, I take a lot of offense to that.
Well, I don't blame you, especially considering what you've been through. You've lived it, so yeah, you know it's factual. From what I understand, you've been addicted to things that go bump in the night your whole life. Please expand on that for us.
So every house that I've ever lived in has been haunted. Now, whether spirits are attracted to me as an empath or if it was just luck of the draw, I don't know. But every house I've ever lived in has had spirits or alien activity or something of the like that has happened. We had south of Bennett back in the 90s when the cattle mutilations were going on. We had a bull that he was mean. I went out to feed one morning and he wasn't anywhere to be found. And I found him about 30 minutes later and he had been mutilated just like had been seen on TV. He was the same way. So that's what kind of put me steadfast in, yeah, okay, aliens exist. I've seen and dealt with things that a lot of people don't necessarily believe in, but I've encountered both good spirits and the extremely negative spirits I have encountered. And I'm not frightened by it. I am more curious by it. Maybe that makes me crazy. Maybe it makes me a little saner than most, but that is how I am. I'm actually a paranormal investigator, and I search for the truth.
Well, it sounds like you've got nerves of steel, so sounds like that's a good occupation for you. Do you think having all those experiences in and around the haunted houses you grew up in helped you to prepare for your Dogman encounter?
I do. I do, because one of my spirit encounters happened at our ranch house, and that was my very first time of actually seeing a ghost was at our ranch house. And that helped me to set my nerves into the aspect of, yeah, things that go bump in the night do exist.
That they do. Well, it's good at least you had some kind of preparation for the experiences that we're going to talk about tonight. You also told me that you're an empath. Do you think that played a role in you having the encounters that you're going to tell us about tonight?
I do. I feel, not I think, that dogmen are attracted to empathic people, just like certain animals are attracted to certain people. As an empath, I've noticed that dogs in particular are really attracted to me. And whether Dogman is a canine or not, I believe that they seek out those who will acknowledge their existence.
Yeah, it is strange how they seek people out like that. All right, Doc, you've got several encounters to tell us about tonight. Please do that now. Give us every last detail that comes to mind.
Okay. Back in, I believe it was 2002 or 2003, my parents had taken my niece and my nephew on a cruise down to Mexico, I believe it was. And they had asked me and my ex-husband and our son if we would go out and watch the house and the property, because I still had horses out there. I had 6 of them. We agreed. We went out there and we stayed for a week. And the first couple days and nights were uneventful. And the third night, I had gone out to feed. I believe it was a Saturday night. My husband at the time was not home. He had gone to go play poker. So it was just my infant son and I. Well, he was a toddler at the house, and I had put him to bed, and I went outside and I fed the horses. And I had my dogs with me, so we all went outside and we fed. And where the fence was that I threw the hay over is on the south side of the house, which oddly enough isn't that far from the abandoned missile silos that are out there. And I fed the horses, and my dogs and I went back in. It was right about dusk. And a couple hours later, after the sun went down, I heard my horses running up to the fence where I would feed, up to the top of the field. And I thought that was really bizarre because they don't run up to the fence until I whistle for them. Otherwise, they're out and about grazing. So I went and I flipped the floodlights on the south side of the house, and I saw all 6 of my horses with their butts toward the house, and they were looking down toward the creek bed. So I thought that was weird. We had issues with coyotes coming onto the property and trying to attack our dogs and the horses in particular. And I had nothing but mares. So I decided that I was going to grab my truck keys and the rifle that I kept above the china cabinet right inside the front door. So I grabbed the rifle, my truck keys, I went and I moved my truck to where my headlights were facing the field and down toward the creek bed. And I got out of my truck and I didn't see anything past my headlights. So I crawled through the fence, I checked on my horses, made sure they were okay, and then I started walking down toward the creek bed. And I got just outside of the view of my headlights, and all 6 of my horses came running up to me. And I had my retired rodeo mare, she put her head in my chest, and one of my rescue mares put her head in my back, and they stopped me and would not let me go any further than where I was. And I tried to move them away, and I tried to walk, and they would not let me. So I thought that was weird, and I heard a rustling, and then I heard a growl emitted from the creek bed. So that instantly I was like, okay, that's not cool. There's something down there, and it's gonna get my horses. And I was very, very protective of my livestock. That was my livelihood. That's how I made money. So my natural instinct was, okay, I'm going to figure out what is growling, and I'm either going to kill it or I'm going to run it off my property, one of the two. I had no choice but to get on my horse. She was trained from when I was a little girl to get down on her front legs if I wanted to ride her bareback. So I was a little kid and I couldn't belly up on her. So she bowed down and got on her front legs, and my other mare, my rescue mare, the one that had her head in my back, shoved me backwards up onto my rodeo mare. And I was like, wow, this is really weird. What is going on? And I heard another growl, and it sounded angry. It sounded like it was going to attack. And I cocked my gun and I fired a shot. And if you've ever shot an animal, you know what it sounds like when that bullet hits something solid. It's a thud noise. And I heard that thud, so I knew I hit it. And I was like, okay, maybe now it's either dead and I'll find the carcass in the morning, or I wounded it and it's off my property. So I let my horses take me back up to my truck. And I go in the house, I put my gun up, and I keep vigil. I keep looking out on the south side of the house the rest of the night until my husband got home. And I told him what happened. And he thought, wow, that's really, really bizarre. So the next morning, we went out, we fed the horses, I put my son in one of those kangaroo pouches, and we decided to walk down to the creek. And in the creek bed, there was a lone aspen tree. It was the only tree on the property. And we noticed there was a tuft of hair. And the tuft of hair was like a gray, black, and purple. Oddly, and I don't know if it was the mixture of the gray and the black, maybe some brown, that made it look purplish. But I grabbed the tuft of hair and I smelled it, and it smelled horrible. It smelled like death. And I threw the hair on the ground, and I looked down, and there were blue droplets on the ground. And I noticed that there was a trail of this blue droplet that went up toward the fence going to the missile silos. So my husband and I decided that we were going to follow that trail. And we followed it up the hill and probably 5 feet on the other side of our property going into the missile silos. And then we lost the trail. So we chalked it up to, okay, well, I injured an animal and it's gone. I wasn't going to bend down and touch this blue stuff on the ground. And maybe it was dried up blood. I don't know. But it had a blue hue to it. So we walk back down onto our property, and we go back up to the house, and the rest of the week out there, nothing happened. Everything was very uneventful. So fast forward a couple years, I had taken 4 of my 6 horses down to Kiowa to get bred. And I was on my way home from picking them up from the breeder, and I was stopped just above the hill from a place called Ghost Bridge. And Ghost Bridge is a really creepy, haunted area out there. And I was stopped at the stop sign, debating on if I wanted to go down toward the ranch to pick up a couple things or if I wanted to go toward town. And I'm standing there and I'm kind of thinking, and I'm also letting my horses rest because it was a long, really bumpy, horrible dirt road that was not maintained at all. And all of a sudden, my truck and my trailer started to sway back and forth. And I was like, wow, what is going on? And it felt like I had been hit by either a massive gust of wind or a tornado out of nowhere, because it was a perfectly still day. And so I look in my passenger mirror on the side of my truck, and I look down at my trailer, and I don't see anything. So I look in my driver's side mirror, and I see this creature that I now know as a dogman. It was standing up on its hind legs. It had the snout and face of not a Rottweiler, but a Doberman Pinscher or another long snout dog. It had pointy ears, and being on its hind legs put it to where its head was a little taller than my stock trailer. And its hind legs looked like a dog's hind legs. And it was a black color. And seeing this, I wasn't so concerned about myself. I was more concerned as a livestock owner. I was concerned about getting my horses out of there. So I put my truck in gear and I stepped on the gas and I got out of there. And I'm driving down the road and I see this dog man jump the fence like it wasn't even there. And it ran through the field, and I watched it for about half a mile, and then it took a sharp left-hand turn, and it went down into the creek bed, which is the Kiowa Creek. And I made sure I got into Bennett as fast as I could. I pulled into my friend's house, and I get out of my truck, and I look at my truck, and I'm like, wow, I don't know what just happened, but that's crazy. And my friend comes out of her house and she sees that I'm white as a ghost. And she's like, what just happened? Like, is everything okay? What happened, Doc? And I told her, I said, you're not going to believe me, but we need to go look at the back of the stock trailer. So we walk back and we look at the back of the stock trailer, and there were claw marks where my gate handle was and going down the side of my stock trailer. And we were like, wow. And she looks at me and she goes, okay, now I need to know what happened. So I proceeded to tell her what happened, and I think she thought I was nuts. But the proof was on my trailer. Whatever I encountered was trying to get into my horses. So I didn't really think much of it, and I avoided that road. Anytime I had to go anywhere near southern Colorado, I avoided that road completely. But I was fascinated. I wanted to know what it was that I saw. And about 6 or 8 months after the dogman attacked my trailer, my husband was coming home in the middle of the night. We lived in Hudson. He was coming home in the middle of the night. He had gotten off the highway. He was stopped at a stop sign, and he looked in one of the ditches that's just on the outskirts of town a little bit, and he saw 2 werewolves, is all he could tell me. He saw 2 werewolves that were walking toward the local butcher. They were on all fours, and I asked him, I said, do you think they could have been coyotes? And he said, no. I've never seen black coyotes, and whatever it was that I saw towered any coyote or any dog that I have ever seen. So we thought that was really odd. And just recently, about a year ago, my adopted son, his family owns a buffalo farm just north of Byers. And he used to love to walk down in the Bijou Creek. Well, one particular day he was down there and he was walking around, and all of a sudden the buffalo start stampeding. And he thought that was weird because buffalo don't just stampede for no reason. And he stopped and he's taking, a look at his surroundings, and he saw this black, at first what he thought was a dog. But he knows that buffalo, if a dog comes out of buffalo, they're going to charge the dog. They're going to charge anything that tries to attack them. And the buffalo were running away from this creature. And the creature stopped. My adopted son was also stopped, and he was by a tree, and he was looking at this creature. And he told me that the creature made eye contact with him. They looked at each other for a few minutes, and then all of a sudden, this creature stood up. It had the face of a dog. It wasn't claws or paws that this creature had. It was hands with claws, and he's seen them. And he said this creature was a good 10 feet tall, and he went after the fact. He ran. When he seen this creature and it stood up, he ran, and he ran away from it. And this creature continued after the buffalo. And his grandpa and him ended up finding 2 dead buffalo the next day, right in the same area that he had his encounter. Now, last summer, my son and my nephew were down. My nephew's family owns part of the Kiowa Creek just north of Bennett. And they were down at the house, and they were doing what typical boys do. They had to go to the bathroom in the middle of the night, and not wanting to wake anybody in the house up, the boys decided that they were going to go outside and see who could urinate the farthest, I guess. And they're standing on the porch, and all of a sudden they hear something up on the roof. And they turn and look. At first they didn't see anything. And then when they turned back around, they were going to go to the bathroom and then go back in the house. They turn back around and they're looking out into an open field. And all of a sudden they hear something clawing at the roof of the house. And then they heard a growl. And they turned around, and this is the middle of the night. They turned around and looked up, and they saw something that stood roughly 10 feet tall from what they told me, and it was blacker than night. They said it was so black you could see it through the blackness of night. And it had amber glowing eyes. And it scared the boys so bad that they ran into the house and locked themselves in the innermost room of the house. And the next day when they went outside, they said that they were afraid to go any further than the house. They said that there was this stench of stagnant pond water and a decaying body. They refused to go any further than the house. Now, just this past summer of 2019, my nephew and one of his friends was down in the creek, and it was nighttime again. And they were messing around and just kind of hanging out down there. And my nephew and his buddy had gotten out of his truck, and they were kind of walking around, and all of a sudden they heard footsteps in the dry brush. And they were like, okay, that's weird. Is that an animal or what is it? And they said the footsteps got closer and closer, and they kept walking away from the footsteps. And they stopped. And when they stopped, the footsteps would stop. Every time they would start walking, the footsteps would start. And my nephew chalked it up to, okay, it's somebody else out here messing with us. So he decided to holler, hello, who's there? And they got in reply a growl. And my nephew thought that was really weird. So they decided to continue walking along the creek. And there was another town kid that had pulled down there and was parked in her vehicle. And the boys decided that they were going to walk down and see if she was in her vehicle or not. Well, they get halfway down there, and it was every time they stopped or they started walking, the creature or whatever it was at that point started walking. And it was like it kept pace with the boys. So the boys stopped, and they shined a flashlight, and they were looking. And at one point, the flashlight beam caught something that had amber glowing eyes. And they said that it was the smell of stagnant pond water and a decaying carcass of some kind. And that's the only time they had noticed the smell, was when their flashlight beam hit the amber eyes, then they noticed the smell. And then they took off running back toward the truck. Well, they get to the back of the truck, and the creature had ran, and it was standing behind my nephew's truck. So instead of getting in the truck, they decide that they're just going to run and hightail it up to the shop. Well, they get up to the shop, and they notice the smell. Again, stagnant pond water and something decaying. And they were like, okay, this is really not cool. So they get in the shop, and they close all the doors, and they lock everything up. And then they heard scratching, like something had jumped on the roof of the shop. And then they heard a growl again. And they felt like they were stuck in the shop. And my nephew started yelling at it, get away, leave us alone. And everything fell silent. And my nephew, he's an empath as well. So about a month after that happened, my nephew was going to meet up with some of his friends down in the creek bed. And this was broad daylight when this one happened. He was walking down the road, down into the creek from the house. And they used to have a pit that it was like a water catch pit. And my nephew was walking down the road, and he said he felt like something was following him or something was watching him. He couldn't hear any noise or anything. And then when he stopped and he started looking around, he saw eyes, glowing amber eyes, peek up from this pit, and they were looking at him and watching him. And it had part of a deer carcass in its mouth. And it continued to watch him. And he decided that he's not going to go any further, that he was going to turn around and go back up to the house, and his friends could meet him at the house. And I know they're out here. And see, out here we don't have any forest. It's just rolling hills. And my encounters out here tell me that you don't need a forest for these creatures, for Dogman, to make themselves known, or even Sasquatch at that. They're anywhere and everywhere they feel they want to be. And I wholeheartedly feel that they are out here, and they know who you are and where you are. It's almost like from the time of your first encounter, they're gonna follow you. They know that you know they exist, and they have to prove that they exist. Whether that's following you or making themselves known in some other way. And see, when I lived up north, my husband and I had bought a house 23 miles due north of Bennett. And our first couple months in the house, the atmosphere was kind of weird if you went outside at night. And I'm a smoker, and I don't smoke in my house. I smoke outside. I had a table or a chair set up outside, and I would go smoke sitting out in front of my house underneath the porch light. One night, right after I had gotten done smoking a cigarette, it was probably about 11:30 at night, and I had gone in the house and I was getting ready to go to bed. And my husband and I heard a knock on our front door, and then we had steel siding on our house. And I went up and I looked out the window and I didn't see anybody. I looked out every window in the house and I didn't see anybody. So after I looked, I decided, okay, well, we're just going to chalk it up to nothing and go back to bed. Well, then we hear what sounds like claws being ran down the side, all sides of our house. And then we heard something jump on our roof. And we thought that was really bizarre. And we didn't have any guns or anything at that point in time, due most in part to having an infant, a toddler, actually, in the house. So I went outside with nothing but a knife. And my husband was in the house protecting our son. And I had taken my dog outside with me. I had an Australian Shepherd. And I had taken him outside with me. And we searched our yard. We searched around the house. And our house was surrounded by trees. It was its own little forest. But we didn't see anything, nor did I smell anything. But there were nights where that would happen 2 or 3 times a night. The sound of something jumping on the roof, the sound of claws being scratched on the side of the house. And there were a couple times where we noticed that paint was missing off the side of our house as well. And then after we lived in our house for 6 months, everything kind of stopped. But there was still that ominous feeling outside until the day I moved out of something watching you, something being right there with you at all times. So that was really, really bizarre for us.
Leading up to the night when you had that unnerving experience in your pasture, had anything happened before that night that might have indicated a large unknown animal might have been hanging around?
Everybody at the house growing up hated the south side of the house. They always felt like something was watching them or like something was rushing up on them, but there was nothing there. And the only time anybody would ever walk on the south side of our house was if the floodlights were on and if they had flashlights. And me, on the other hand, I would walk, clear out into the field where there was absolutely no light. and I had no problem with it, but everybody else felt like something was watching them.
I wonder what that was all about. Maybe you were being watched. It's hard to say.
Well, and it's entirely possible. And see, I had spoken with the researcher before I decided to go ahead and contact you. I had spoken to her about it, and her and I had talked about the fact that, when I was a little girl, I used to go horseback riding in the middle of the night, and I used to sleep out in the field with my horses. Maybe it wasn't just my horses that I was down there in the field with. Maybe I was friends with a dog man or something growing up, and I just don't remember it.
Well, I highly doubt that, but I guess anything's possible.
Well, yeah, and see, I'm not frightened by it, but I do know that there's a possibility that it may not have been just my horses that I was sleeping in the field with.
Yeah, that's definitely possible. You never know. You told us about the strange fur you and your husband found the day after your first experience. Have you collected any other strange evidence like that?
I have not. I have not.
I can only imagine how bad that tuft of fur must have smelled.
Oh, it was horrendous. I would rather smell formaldehyde the rest of my life than smell that again.
Oh, I'll bet, and yeah, I understand. Between the night when you had your first encounter and the second one years later, did anything happen on or around your farm that might have been Dogman related?
I noticed that my horses acted funny after that encounter. I did notice that my horses would act funny, and it was usually just during the summertime, going down anywhere near the creek. They would not go down toward the creek. And see, the only tree down there was the aspen tree, and it's just rolling hills. And there was also, they refused to go onto the Missile Siler property. After my encounter, I'd go horseback riding, and they would refuse to step foot on the Missile Siler property. And if I would try to make them go on the property, I would get thrown off and I would get left, and they would run home.
Well, I'm sorry to hear that they did that, but I guess at least they got their point across to you.
Painfully so, yes.
Yeah, it sounds like it. How badly were your horses freaking out that night when the dogman was trying to get into the trailer with them?
They're the ones that really started rocking my trailer. And that encounter happened in broad daylight. And when the dogman was trying to get into the trailer, the horses are what started rocking my trailer back and forth to the point where it was moving my truck. So I had no choice but to look and see what was going on. And thankfully, I had a rail up along my windows that nothing could reach very far in. And I did that for safety reasons, because I had a person try to reach in and pet one of my horses through the window, and they broke their hand.
Wow, yeah, thank goodness you did have that bar in place then. Was your rodeo mare one of the horses you had with you in the trailer that day?
She was, yes.
I'm not sure if that was a good thing or a bad thing. Sounds like she was pretty cool, calm, and collected, so that was probably a good thing.
Yeah, I rodeoed with her, and I also taught kids how to ride horses on her, too. So she was a very, very good horse.
Yeah, sounds like it. How far were you from home when you had that second encounter?
I was about 7 miles from my house.
Okay, so pretty close.
Yeah, really close.
You said you don't have forests by where you live, but your second encounter happened by the Black Forest. How big is that forest?
So the Black Forest is a couple 100 miles, and where my encounter was, it was on the outskirts of where the Black Forest ends. And so the Black Forest ends in Elbert, and my encounter was just south of Bennett, and Elbert and the Black Forest are only maybe 20 miles apart. So, I mean, it's not very far, but the Kiowa Creek runs up through the Black Forest. And it actually begins in the Black Forest.
So yeah, it wasn't that far then.
No, it wasn't far. And if dogmen do migrate and travel, which every animal does, it's a food source. The Kiowa Creek is an underground, south to north flowing creek, and it's a very shallow aquifer. So if they're going to migrate to where the aquifer has risen, they're going to migrate north because that's where the water table gets the highest. There's a lot of creeks and a lot of farm out here, and so all the creeks you can tell are where the trees are. The trees are going to grow where there's water. And cottonwoods and silver maples, their roots are relatively shallow, so the aquifer isn't far. And the trees are really thick along all the creeks out here. And that's, perfect cover. Plus, there's a lot of irrigation and stuff, too, that is out here as well.
Yeah, if you think about it, a dogman would have everything it would need right there by the creek, so it does make sense that that's where one would tend to hang out.
Yep.
You said the dogman was taller than your horse trailer. Considering how most horse trailers are about 7 feet tall or so, how tall would you say that dogman was?
I would say he was probably 10 feet. He was big. I've heard that you can tell if they're male and female, but I honestly was not paying attention to whether it was male or female. I was just concentrating on saving my animals. Because as a rancher, that's what your key thing is you protect your livestock no matter what.
Oh, sure. Well, like they say, if it doesn't bother the cows, then it's not a problem.
Right.
If you think it was 10 feet tall, it sounds like it must have been head and shoulders above the top of that trailer then.
Yeah, it was big.
Wow, yeah, must have been. Did it look like it was really trying to get into your trailer with the horses, or do you think maybe it was just trying to get a rise out of you by doing whatever it did?
Well, when I inspected my trailer and I saw where the claw marks were, so there were claw marks where the handle for my gate to open my gate was. And it looked like the claws were trying to grab my gate latch. And then when I took off as fast as I did, it couldn't grip anything. It couldn't get a hold of it to get any of my horses out.
You said you took off really fast. Is that one of those angle loading trailers, or did you load them head on?
It's a front load trailer. And the way I redid my trailer was I had 2 stalls up front and 2 stalls in the back with a separating bar and then what is called a butt bar, so that if my back gate were to fall, or if it wasn't secure and it were to fall going down the road, that my horses would still be secure in the trailer. And that's how I fabricated it, because we had our gate fall going down the road at one point in time. That was scary.
Yeah, I'll bet it was. Well, yeah, thank goodness you did have the butt bar installed then.
Yeah.
Speaking of the claw marks, did you ever take any pictures of them?
I did not. I didn't even think to, because I was kind of at a point in time in my life was, am I crazy? Did I really see this? Did this even happen? So I didn't get any pictures, and I didn't have a cell phone back then, and I don't even think I owned a 35 millimeter camera at that point.
Well, too, you had a lot on your mind. After an experience like that, yeah, you just wanted to get the horses home and get things taken care of, so yeah, no one can hold that against you.
Yeah.
After having as many encounters as your nephew has had, did he ever tell you why he continued to go back into those areas where he might have had more encounters the way he did?
He's a lot like me. He needs facts. At first it'll scare him, but then when he sits and he rationalizes everything, he's like I am. He's a factual person. And he grew up playing in that creek. That's his childhood. That's where he is comfortable at, and he's not going to let anybody or anything run him away from his area.
Wow, he sounds like a pretty resolute guy. Obviously, you're a very resolute woman, so yeah, you're cut from the same cloth.
Yes.
That's impressive. Well, Doc, it's about time for us to get out of here, but before we do you have any closing comments you'd like to share?
I think that you should always believe what you see. There's some people that are on hallucinogens and whatever, and they see things all the time. But as a sober person, I have to have the facts. I'm a very factual person. I will seek the truth and I will seek answers, and nothing is going to frighten me away from it. Now, maybe that makes me crazy, but maybe that makes me smart at the same time. There are many people that I have listened to your show and I have heard that dogmen have frightened them so badly that they're afraid to do the things they love. I'm one of those people that I face my fears. I face things head on, and that's how I have always been. And if I can overcome fear with the things that I have been through in my life and the things that I have encountered in my life, I think that it's within possibility and probability that anybody else out there who has had a dogman encounter can conquer their fear. Don't let your encounters hinder you from what you like to do. Mother Nature is always going to be there. Dogmen are out there, whether there's scientific evidence or whether it's just your eyes. You know what you see. But face your fear and embrace the things that you love. Just be a little bit more cautious about the things that you go out and you do. Know that they're there. Know that they're out there. But don't let them frighten you to the point where you can't embrace the things that you love anymore. I don't think that is a good, healthy thing for anybody to allow to happen. Fear is just that, fear. It's either face everything and run or face everything head on and learn. That is how I have always lived my life. And being a factual person, I am going to seek answers, whether that's through research or whether it's through listening to your show or whether it's having another encounter or whatever. I'm going to find answers, and I seek those answers, but not actively. I wait for something to happen, and then I make sure that I am safe, and I'm going to figure it out. I'm going to get the answer to it. So don't let your fear get in the way of the way that you want to live your life. Don't let it get in the way of what you love. And if dogmen truly do communicate telepathically, if you mentally say, I'm not going to hurt you, maybe they'll listen. I don't know. That's just my perspective, and that's my point of view. But I don't think anybody needs to live in fear for the rest of their life. I think that it's very, very plausible that people can overcome the things that they fear. And that's my best advice.
Wow, Doc, I like the way you think. If only more eyewitnesses could practice what you preach, I think they'd be in a lot better shape. But having said that, I want to thank you so much for coming on the show and telling us about all those experiences. I really appreciate it.
Oh, not a problem. Thank you for having me. It's been nice.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks again so much. Have a great night. If you've had a dogman encounter of your own and would like to speak with me, whether in private or on the show, please go to dogmanencounters.com and submit a report. I'd love to hear from you.